What if I told you that to understand the future of Bitcoin, you first had to understand the legal battles of a 17th century English king? It sounds pretty out there, I know, but what if the rulebook for digital money wasn't written in code, but was actually hidden in centuries-old law? Okay, let's get into this.
So, on one hand, you have King Charles I, a monarch who believed he ruled by divine right, using his absolute power through courts like the, well, infamous Star Chamber. And on the other hand, Satoshi Nakamoto, the totally anonymous creator of Bitcoin, who built a system where impartial code is the law. These two worlds, separated by almost 400 years, are about to crash into each other in a modern courtroom. And that really brings us to the core question here today. Can looking at the power struggles of Stuart England actually give us a fresh perspective on the fight to control Bitcoin? As we're about to see, the answer is a pretty surprising yes. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to explore this whole idea of an ancient code for Bitcoin, look at the old law of trusts, the historic battles over copyright, and the huge difference between a king's rule and the rule of law. And then we'll see how all of this led to a really dramatic modern verdict that could shape everything that comes next. Okay, so let's start with a really fundamental question. How in the world can you own a decentralized idea like Bitcoin? Well, the answer someone proposed comes from a very, very old piece of English law, the trust. The main thing to get here is that a trust basically splits ownership in two. You have one person, the trustee, who has legal control and has to manage the asset. But, and this is the key, they don't actually own it for themselves. They're just holding it for the benefit of somebody else, who we call the beneficiary. This concept is ancient, typically used for stuff like land or family fortunes. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Look at how perfectly this old-school structure was mapped onto Bitcoin. The argument was basically that Satoshi Nakamoto, as the creator or settler, put the Bitcoin blockchain into a trust. The miners who keep the network running are the trustees. They have a duty to manage it properly. And the beneficiaries? Well, that's everyone who uses Bitcoin. All of a sudden, this wild, decentralized technology gets this very traditional, very English legal framework dropped right on top of it. Okay, so that's one piece of the puzzle, but the argument builds from there with another legal claim. This one moves us from owning an idea to owning its specific form, and that brings us to the law of copyright. This timeline just perfectly captures this recurring theme, doesn't it? It's the state's obsession with controlling information. I mean, back in 1637, the king's own court, the Star Chamber, literally had a guy's ears cut off for publishing things the crown didn't like. His words were a fixed expression they wanted to crush. Now, jump to 2024, and you have a UK court hearing arguments that the Bitcoin file format itself is a fixed literary work. It's the same battle, just with different technology. So this was the heart of the legal strategy in the big Cowper versus Wright case. The claim was that the specific way Bitcoin's data is structured, the headers, the transactions, all of it, isn't just a functional process. No, they argued it's an original, creative text fixed in code, just like a novel is fixed on the pages of a book. And if that were true, whoever created it would own the copyright. But the court just wasn't buying it, not at all. Justice Mueller's ruling made it crystal clear. The Bitcoin file format is not a poem. It's not a story. It's a set of functional rules, an idea for how a system should operate. And in copyright law, you can protect the expression of an idea, sure, but you can't own the idea itself. So that whole claim just fell apart. And that brings us right to the core of this whole thing. How do you regulate a network like this? Is it through the random power of one person or through a fair, impartial system of rules? I mean, this is the classic showdown between a king's whim and the rule of law. I mean, the contrast here is just night and day. The Star Chamber under Charles I could basically do whatever the king wanted. That's power based on one person's authority. Bitcoin was designed to be the polar opposite. Its rules are baked into the math and the cryptography. They're meant to be unchangeable, to stop any one person or group from just taking over and doing whatever they want. So why are these super rigid rules so important? Well, it's to solve a huge problem in the digital world. Double spending. Think about it. Without a central bank watching over everything, what's to stop me from spending the same digital coin twice? Bitcoin's genius was its proof-of-work system. It basically creates a timeline, an irreversible order of transactions, a history that can't be rewritten on a whim by a king or by anyone else. And this leads to another wild historical analogy that was used in this debate. The network's miners, they're not some chaotic mob. No, they were described as a well-regulated militia.
an idea straight out of the American Revolution. In this view, the miners used their computing power to defend the free state of the Bitcoin network. But, and this is so important, they're all subordinate to a higher civil power. And that power isn't a king or a president, it's the unchangeable code of the protocol itself. Okay, so you have all of these grand, sweeping historical and legal theories on the table. Trusts, copyright, militias, the whole shebang. So how did they actually hold up when they were put under the microscope in a modern court of law? Well, the answer came fast, and it was brutal. The entire foundation for these claims, this whole structure built on historical parallels and legal theory, it just completely crumbled when it came up against the modern rules of evidence. The High Court's findings were, to put it lightly, devastating. The judge declared, point blank, that Dr. Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto. And here's the critical part. The documents he used to try and prove it were found to be forgeries. They were fake. And because of that, all the other claims about copyright in the file format, database rights in the blockchain, they were all dismissed. And this is where history serves up the final perfect twist. Sir William Blackstone, the guy who literally wrote the book on English common law, defined forgery this way all the way back in 1769. So the court's modern finding that the evidence was based on forgery, that wasn't some new technicality. It was an echo of a legal principle that's just as old as the very laws that were being brought up in the case in the first place. So, where does that leave us? The specific legal claims in this case failed, big time. But the collision of ancient law and modern technology has thrown open the door to a whole new chapter of questions. What we've really seen is that you can spin a fantastic story connecting the Stuart Kings to cyberspace. It's compelling stuff, but in a court of law, that story is only as strong as your evidence. The attempt to force-fit these old legal boxes onto Bitcoin didn't work this time, but it did force a much-needed conversation about how we're going to govern these powerful new digital systems. This particular battle might be over, but the larger struggle to define the rules for our digital world is really just getting started. This case was an attempt to use the king's justice to tame a new frontier. It failed, and that leaves us with a huge, lingering question. If the old laws don't fit, who's going to write the new ones, and what are they going to say?